Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. We've got a jam-packed episode for you. Get ready to dive into wrestling's rich history, packed with insights, opinions, and a few surprises. And remember, you can skip to your favorite moments with our chapter markers. Let's jump right into it. February 14, 2000 Observer Newsletter. Vince McMahon announces the XFL 1999 Wrestling Observer Newsletter Awards. By Dave Meltzer. Vince McMahon made sports and business headlines on February 3 with the announcement of him starting his own professional football league called the XFL. McMahon, who failed in negotiations last year to buy the Canadian Football League, looks to be that league's #1 rival for players not quite good enough for the NFL in his 18 league scheduled to start in February 2001 with each team playing 10 games and ending with championship playoffs in April. The announcement sent his stock prices tumbling, closing at press time at $11.38 per share on February 8, down from $17.88 at the time of the announcement, meaning McMahon's own personal paper worth in WWFE stock dropped from a high of $1.66 billion when the stock opened at $34 to the public down to the current $555.9 million, with his personal on-paper losses since the football announcement being $317.8 million over 5 days. One would think at this rate the stock is terribly undervalued and will bounce back, but it has yet to bounce back from the previous drop caused by advertisers pulling out, despite ratings across the board increasing, and no more advertisers leaving with the change to a tamer product. Unlike after the advertiser pullout story, which saw the stock drop from hovering in the low 20s to the 14 to 15 level, investment analysts are no longer considering the stock a good investment even at the reduced price. McMahon took the losses in stride, or at least in stride in character, claiming the stock brokerage houses that downgraded his stock after the football announcement don't get it, that they could kiss his ass and were full of prunes. All color aside, most of those remarks were clearly done to get press, which he succeeded in doing, but the flip side was his acting unlike a major corporation CEO in a public forum caused stockholders to lose confidence in him with an unusually high volume looking to sell out, also figuring the risks of starting a new football league are high. Since the company went public, while the WWF brand has continued to be enormously profitable and gross income continues to increase and the company has gotten a tremendous amount of publicity, but McMahon hasn't been able to avoid his longtime problem of walking headfirst into problems that have made shareholders lose confidence in WWFE as a public company, whether it be the PTC content controversy, which he reacted to confrontationally at first which cost them in the market, the Coca-Cola pulling out which, even if the company didn't lose 1 cent in advertising due to it being the Christmas season and new sponsors willing to jump into the spots others jumped out of, the company paid for it with an even larger stock tumble than the football announcement resulted in. It's way too soon to try and analyze McMahon as a pro football owner. Forgetting about paper assets, WWFE has probably in the neighborhood of $235 million in assets, about $63 million in accrued profits over the 17 years McMahon has owned the company and the rest from his windfall in selling 17% of company stock when it went public late last year. He is earmarking somewhere between $75 million and $100 million of that to getting the league off the ground, claiming he would be profitable by a 3rd season. McMahon claimed his company would be running the league on its own, saying we're not looking for partners, we don't play well with others. Other sources indicate McMahon's downside isn't quite as large and he is looking for other investors. McMahon claimed not to be taking on the NFL, saying they would pay the best compensation to players of any football league with the exception of the NFL, but knock them as the no-fun league. Some reports have indicated each team would have a $2 million salary cap, which means on a 40-man roster, they would be composed of $50,000 per year players. Other reports indicate they'd be paying players from $75,000 to $100,000 and relying on incentive-based contracts. The idea is to keep costs low and not compete with the NFL, which did in previous attempts like the USFL and WFL, which were huge money losers. However, other attempts as pro football that kept salaries low and didn't compete with the NFL, in particular an NFL-sponsored World League, which has succeeded in Europe after US franchises didn't make it, and attempts at bringing the Canadian Football League into the US also failed miserably. Just recently, 2 companies with far deeper pockets and far more experience in the football business, Ted Turner and NBC, were planning on starting their own football league, and dropped the idea feeling it wouldn't be able to make it financially. The games are scheduled to be played at major stadiums, with tickets being priced in the $22 to $25 range and teams in major media markets such as New York, Los Angeles, Washington, San Francisco, Miami, Orlando and 2 other unannounced cities and venues, such as 3Com Park in San Francisco and Giants Stadium, have been talked with. The question is partially whether McMahon can get people to the stadiums of that size to see what would basically be minor league football during poor weather months, and market the game strongly enough that they can draw competitive network ratings on Sundays after NFL and college season has concluded. And then comes the questions, like working games. Of course, McMahon denied they would do anything of the sort, but skepticism of that remains high. Clearly, they are going to establish personalities, probably mostly worked, which will invite suspicion, and rely on pro wrestling hype to get players and the teams over. How McMahon will react if he creates a star who can talk, but the star isn't good enough to get the job done on the field is where it gets interesting, because in wrestling he's never had to really deal with it. But even a new game works on some level, they'll still struggle because as long as they pay minor league football salaries, even if they can create stars, they'll still be the ECW of football. Anyone who is actually a really good overlooked find will quickly leave for the greater riches of playing in the real league. While McMahon's track record over the long term in pro wrestling is without question its greatest promoter in history, his success outside his chosen field is far more spotty. An attempt to make it as a major boxing promoter failed after only a few fights. An attempt to modernize pro bodybuilding was an even bigger failure. An attempt to produce major movies barely got off the ground. He has been very successful at marketing products with a pro wrestling base, such as entrance music CDs, biographies and magazines and other merchandise using characters, but has no track record when he leaves his comfortable wrestling world. It is too soon to tell about his pro wrestling theme cafe WWF New York, which just opened and is currently getting heavy publicity, but the company already quietly gave up on a much ballyhooed purchase of the former Debbie Reynolds Hotel in Las Vegas, which is currently back up for sale. The WWF's involvement in football started with consideration of buying the Minnesota Vikings, although the company never made an offer. Last February they were approached about buying the Toronto Argonauts of the CFL, but responded that they wanted to buy the entire league. Several of the money-losing teams wanted to continue discussions with the WWF, but ultimately it failed because the majority of owners were concerned McMahon would change the rules of their game, expand into the US, and pull out of smaller Canadian markets. Some also believe the end result of this will be to increase salaries in the CFL through an enhancement of the CFL-NFL relationship. There will be some rule changes, such as no fair catches like in Canada and only 1 foot having to land inbounds, along with having cameras everywhere on the field including on the players' helmets, and taking people into the huddles. A lot depends on a television deal, and WWF can use the ratings power of its own franchise to help put together a package deal with many networks. Still, most of the failed pro football leagues had major television coverage. In the midst of personal tragedy, SABU's tenure in ECW appears finished for WCW, but late this past week his 71-year-old mother suffered 2 heart attacks. She was in stable enough but still serious condition by the early part of the week that family members were returning to work. Terry Brunk SABU agreed to a deal on February 2nd with WCW after talks between the two sides had been going on for at least several days, prompting threats of a lawsuit by Paul Heyman and ECW. Internet reports have listed the figure going around at $500,000 per year, but the general feeling within the industry is the number is nowhere close to that, but probably close to double what he was earning in ECW. Top pay in ECW is a little under $200,000 per year, and SABU is on that top list. What is clear is that Heyman had Brunk under contract through January 15, 2003 on a contract signed as of July 29. The basic claim from one side is that while there was a contract, Heyman had breached it in some form, allegedly due to late payments for pay-per-view money. ECW's side is that there was no breach, although there have been complaints going around about pay-per-view money being owed, and the contract specifically calls for, in the event of a breach, a letter being written to give 90 days notice for the company to absolve the breach, and that no letter was ever written. ECW contracts stat that any filing to terminate the contract must be brought in either state or federal court in Westchester County, and no such letter or filing had been made by Brunk. WCW's plan was to debut SABU on the February 14 Nitro as a big surprise at the Nassau Coliseum. Heyman and WCW Legal had many discussions on February 7 regarding Heyman's claim that the company had tampered with his contracted personnel and that he had a binding contract with Brunk which may affect that start date. Heyman on February 7 said that he was willing to sell his rights to SABU's contract to WCW since there really is no upside to his returning to the company at this point, but he said he wouldn't simply let him go without something in return, and if no settlement was made, threatened a temporary restraining order against both Brunk and WCW to keep him from appearing on the show, as well as threatened a lawsuit and a complaint to the Justice Department over a contract tampering charge. The departure of Sabu couldn't have come at a worse time for ECW, with its top star, Rob Van Dam, along with Jerry Lynn, both out of action with serious leg injuries. It had been noted Sabu was unhappy in a supporting role and no longer was considered one of the top 2 or 3 stars in the company. Going to WCW is going to be difficult because clearly his best days are behind him, and his breaking tables gimmick has been done so often in WCW that he'd be just another hardcore division wrestler on a long trip to nowhere. And like the problem so many have faced in WCW, the top names for the most part are protective of their position and are generally unwilling to work with and elevate people to their spot, particularly those who they can complain are too short and not strong enough on interviews. Because Sabu is weak in old-style working as well as being a realistic cruiserweight, it is doubtful, without a change in the structure of the WCW Elite, that the top guys would allow him to compete for a headline position. On the positive side for him is Kevin Sullivan as Booker, since he would be brought in as a Sullivan ally due to the old Sullivan-Ed Farhat-Mark Lewin type connection from years long ago. Nevertheless, at 36, if WCW's offer was double what he was making in ECW and with his body giving out from all the punishment he put himself through, there is really no business choice then to take the offer, provided he isn't bound to his contract. The hottest Raw in a long time on February 7th drew a 6.49 rating, 6.11 first hour, 6.84 seconds hour, and a 9.8 share. Nitro fell once again to its worst showing in years, a 2.66 rating, 2.97 first hour, 2.38 seconds hour, and a 3.8 share. Although the final show Nash booked did a 2.61 rating, the all-time low, that was a 3-hour show and had football competition. WCW, with its older age group, was probably hurt somewhat by Mary Tyler Moore, as shown by first unopposed hour to sink below a 3.0. For the first time ever, the USA's Walker, Texas Ranger, which did a 3.3, beat WCW Nitro for the first time. The combined audience for the head-to-head hour was approximately 9.8 million viewers. Raw was paced by the 10-man tag match, which drew one of the biggest audiences for any match in the history of pro wrestling on cable television, with an 8.11 rating for the final 7 minutes of the main event, which is of course an unopposed number. Nitro's Vicious vs. Hall match in Hall's return drew a 2.78 opposed rating. Once again, this change coincides with Benoit and company switching sides. When Nitro ended, Raw picked up about 26% of the Nitro viewership. And that's with TNT continuing with wrestling-related programming, with the movie Shutter Speed starring Steve Borden, Sting, with executive producers Eric Bischoff and Jason Hervey, which actually did better, although still poorly, for its encore showing 1.39 rating, than it did for its premiere the previous night. Head-to-head quarters saw Raw at 5.93, Radicals, Cactus and Helmsley interview, to Nitro's 2.45, Funk vs. David Flair, Raw at 6.32, continuation of Opening Angle, to Nitro's 2.01, Disco vs. Stevie Ray, Raw at 6.09, Outlaws vs. Edge and Christian Angle vs. Henry, to Nitro's 2.19, Knobs vs. Bigelow, Kidman vs. Demon, and Raw at 5.83, Acolytes vs. Hollies plus Mae Young, to Nitro's 2.63, Luger Jimmy Hart Angle. WWF SmackDown, headlined by Triple H vs. Benoit on February 3rd, drew a 4.71 rating and 7.0 share, which is the share it averages. Thunder on February 2nd, featuring the return of Hulk Hogan, dropped to a 2.31 rating, from 2.66 the previous week without Hogan, and 3.6 share. Hogan's interview was the peak rating at 2.54, while the low point was David Flair and Crowbar vs. Vito and Johnny at 2.14. Weekend ratings for February 5th and February 6th saw Livewire at 1.6, Superstars at 1.6, Sunday Night Heat at 3.54, and WCW Saturday Night at 1.4. The premiere of the movie Shutter Speed on February 6th was a huge flop after all the hype, doing a 1.22 rating. ECW on February 4th delivered its second straight 0.98 rating with a 1.7 share, which can't be taken as a positive after all the weeks of build-up to Rhodes finally wrestling on TV. I think both WCW and ECW have established the older guys can be brought back, and because of the respect older fans have for them, and their own ability from years of working in knowing how to get a response, that they can got a pop from the crowd live, but they no longer mean anything when it comes to ratings, even as a one-time return curiosity. Roller Jam dropped slightly to 0.60 and Rock'n'Roll is now at 0.24. ECW peaked in the second quarter at 1.09, which would be the Rhodes match, and dropped slightly for the remainder of the show. EAYADA poll results. Results of the poll question on the EAYADA.com website. New questions will be up every day at approximately 3 p.m. Eastern Time, with the results being announced at the start of the Wrestling Observer Live internet audio show the following day along with each week here. Due to a programming survey in its place, there was no question asked for much of this past week. What was the best wrestling TV show of the past, January 26th to January 31st, week? A. Raw 83%, B. Nitro 4%, C. ECW on TNN 8%, D. SmackDown 2%, E. Thunder 3%. Japanese television rundown. January 16th, All Japan. 1. Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama retained the double tag titles, beating Vader and Johnny Smith in 17:10. The last 8 minutes aired. Akiyama pinned Smith after 2 back suplexes. Vader was clearly working hurt, so the match wasn't as good as it looked on paper, but still good. 3 stars. 2. Kobashi pinned Takao Omori after 2 lariats in 18:31. Only the last 4 minutes aired, but what aired had really good heat and looked good. 3. Akiyama pinned Yoshihiro Takayama with a cradle in 10:39. The entire match aired. Akiyama is a miracle worker, getting a match this good in singles out of Takayama. Picture someone carrying someone worse than Van Hammer to a 3-star match. 3 stars. January 23rd, All Japan. 1. Vader pinned Akiyama to retain the Triple Crown in 16:13. Excellent world title style match. They opened fast with Akiyama hitting 2 German suplexes in the first 2:30. Vader's jumping for the move was a little too obvious on the first, and the fans were already into the near falls. After some brawling in the crowd, Vader choke-slammed Akiyama over the guardrail onto one of those thick tables that bent but didn't break. Vader power-bombed Akiyama on the mats outside the ring. Vader looked really heavy, like maybe 390, and the pace slowed in the middle, but it never lost its intensity. Vader did 2 Vader bombs for near falls. He tried another, but Akiyama got his knees up. Akiyama came back with a back suplex and flying forearm followed by a dragon screw, but then Vader sidestepped a dropkick to the knee, which was pretty cool because nobody expected it. Vader went for another Vader bomb, but Akiyama got up and power bombed him off the middle ropes, hit a high knee off the top, an exploder, a great high knee in the corner, and another exploder for a great near fall. Akiyama came off the top, but Vader power slammed him in a slightly mistimed spot for a near fall. Vader did a power bomb for a near fall, followed by a choke slam which Akiyama turned into an armbar, which was a great submission spot leading to a rope break. Vader hit a release German suplex and got the pin with a choke slam. After the match, Vader confronted Kobashi, who was doing commentary at ringside, and basically said, "You're next, MF, 4.25 stars." 2. Kobashi pinned Kawada in 18:15 in Kawada's first match back after 3 eye operations. This was even better than the previous match and rated match of the year quality, although it was too dangerous in spots. Kawada dropped Kobashi on his head 20 seconds into the match to get the fans into it from the start and nailed him with high kicks, Enzudrian kicks to all parts of his body. There was a great standing slapfist. Kawada seemed to tire, but his kicks were still awesome and Kobashi sold them great. They did a lot of teasing big moves. Kawada dropped Kobashi on his head a second time at a really awkward-looking angle. The crowd intensity at this point wasn't as good as usual, but they popped for the spots. Kobashi blocked the Gonzo bomb and Kawada continued on him with great offense, including an armbar in the middle. The All Japan TV style of going to a commercial break right in the middle of the heat before the finish really takes away from the intensity being built as they went to the commercial just as Kobashi locked the hold on. Kawada dropped Kobashi on his head a third time and started nailing him with all the kicks when Kobashi did the comeback. Both men lariated each other and both sold it. Kobashi got up first, hit a tiger suplex, a powerbomb and bridge, set up a lariat coming off the ropes, but Kawada simply collapsed. Kobashi then picked him up and hit a short-range lariat for the pin. 4.5 stars. January 29th, New Japan. 1. Norton pinned Fry in 8:50. We had heard this was a terrible match. They only aired 3:30 and what aired looked fine and had good heat, including Norton giving Fry an ultra-stiff clothesline and a suplex over the top rope onto the ramp. The finish was really bad since Norton did a power bomb, Fry clearly kicked out and the ref counted 3 anyway. 2. They re-aired the Muto vs. Chono match from January 4th and the show ended with a lengthy Chono interview. January 30th, Dream Stage Entertainment. This was the Tokyo Dome pay-per-view show. Overall, the show looked major league, between the band playing on the entrance stage, good ring intros and the crowd shots of a nearly packed dome and all the celebrity shots, almost none of the faces which would be recognizable to an American fan. The fights ranged in quality, as would happen in a shoot show, with the usual mismatches. The big problem in hindsight was making agreements with fighters in 2 of the matches with different rules, not telling the public, and then not following through with those agreements, resulting in the organization coming off as really dishonest. 1. Vanderlei Silva, 206, Brazil, beat Bob Schreiber, 235, Netherlands in the alternates match in 241. Silva was too quick and in far better condition. Even though he was giving up weight, he dominated the standing. He then took Schreiber down, where Schreiber was clearly inexperienced got him out, then got his back and started punching him before sinking in the choke. It was one-sided but pretty exciting. 2. Gary Goodridge, 221, Canada, beat Osamu Tashiakari, 275, Japan in 50. Goodridge was by far the lightest he's ever fought but looks to have totally given up the weights to concentrate on fighting. He, more than anyone on the show, looks like he should be in pro wrestling with not only a great look but the way he carries himself like a badass and works the crowd as he's remained over and with star power despite some losses where he hasn't looked impressive both here and in K1. As expected, this was a total mismatch with Goodridge pounding him standing while Tashiakari tried sumo tactics. He was a sumo before going into pro wrestling, which doesn't work when somebody is punching you back. They ended up on the ground with Goodridge on top and he put on a forearm choke, which most fighters don't tap to, but Tashiakari, clearly a deer in the headlights, tapped furiously. 3. Akira Shoji, 201, Japan, won a decision over Ebenezer Fontes Braga, 215, Brazil, after 15 minutes. Braga, who was a lot taller and thus had a big reach advantage, seemed better standing although Shoji wasn't afraid to exchange with him. Shoji took him down and most of the match was Shoji on top. Shoji threw punches down and Braga threw punches up with nothing serious landing. Braga escaped once but was taken down. With about a minute left, it appeared Shoji let him up and they traded. Shoji threw a kick and Braga threw a punch and Shoji went down, more from a loss of balance than the punch. Shoji did get the 2 takedowns but this fight was close enough that they should have called it a draw and sent it into overtime. 4. Kazuyuki Fujita, 237, Japan, beat Hansa Nyman, 248, Netherlands, 259. Fujita is a very good wrestler, but looked very inexperienced at this game. Fujita came out to one of the New Japan theme music songs of the past, early 80s promo music, which got a nice reaction. This match had great heat because of the pro wrestling connection and the wrestling fan audience base. Nyman looked out of shape and is 40 years old, but his karate background was enough that he connected on 2 kicks to the body that stunned Fujita. Fujita then tackled him and was in the guard. Once he broke the guard, he used a headlock crank combined with the people's eyebrow, obviously making the move far more effective for the submission, but not before getting a major mouse under the left eye when Nyman from the bottom connected on a solid punch. Fujita is clearly a powerful, gifted athlete, but doesn't look to be a favorite because he has limited stand-up experience and thus can be hit. 5. Kazushi Sakuraba, 190, Japan, won via retirement over Guy Mesger, 202, United States, after 15 minutes. This was a very good match for insiders because of it being a tactical battle. Mesger was largely able to keep Sakuraba out of his game by avoiding his takedowns. Standing was not Sakuraba's prime game but he did well and it was pretty even. Sakuraba landed 2 good kicks to the side of the neck at about 5 minutes. Mesger landed a side kick and snuck in another kick. Sakuraba tried the Baba chop several times to entertain the crowd. Mesger's best defense was in blocking a takedown. Mesger somewhat got his back and was able to throw some punches and elbows in before Sakuraba escaped. Both guys were really tired and Sakuraba did look more tired here than in his much longer fights in the past, probably because he's fought too often and you can only peak so often and really he's almost due for a loss because of his schedule, not to mention him having to fight the entire way standing. Sakuraba got Mesger down a few more times but Mesger escaped quickly each time. One could say Mesger controlled how the fight was fought and used that to say he deserved the decision. Really, a unanimous draw the judges' votes was the fair decision and if I was forced to pick, I'd say Sakuraba by a hair. I will say people watching it with me said Mesger by a hair but all agreed a draw was fair because even though Mesger got him to fight his fight, Sakuraba was the more aggressive of the two and neither seriously damaged the other. From the reactions, It did appear Sakuraba didn't know about the pre-match agreement to have the judges pick a winner and no overtime in this fight, as he didn't seem surprised when the ref ordered them to go back out. Mesger seemed surprised, but seemed willing to do it even though he was really tired. Shamrock stepped in and ordered him to the back and yelled at the ref about ordering a second round. Fans, who didn't understand what was going on, booed Shamrock and Mesger heavily. Later in the show, after most of the fans left but before the pay-per-view show ended, they did acknowledge the miscommunication. 6. Mark Coleman 240 United States, beat Masaki Sadake 233 Japan in 112. Coleman took Sadake down powerfully, then grabbed the back of his head and pulled in with his strength, was able to make it into a necklock for the submission. 7. Igor Vachenchin 237 Russia, beat Alexander Otska 188 Japan, via decision after 15 minutes. Otska deserves a lot of credit for hanging in there and taking some bombs and hanging tough, especially giving away so much in size against the #1 ranked heavyweight in the world. I'm not sure what he deserves for still doing his ring crew work and doing a pro wrestling match on Topes and Frankensteiners earlier in the same day and trying pro wrestling moves during the match, but largely it shows his dedication to the craft of being a pro wrestler. Vachenchin mainly sprawled, avoiding takedowns, and punched hard on the ground. Otska tried a pro wrestling dropkick to the knee. That doesn't work in real life. Vachenchin rocked Otska several times, but at one point Otska outmaneuvered him on the ground and went for a triangle choke. He didn't get the hold on nearly good enough for a submission, but managed to hold Vachenchin long enough to deliver a few Baba chops. They don't work in a real fight against guys of this caliber, but I guess this shows just how much all the pro wrestlers try to pay tribute to Baba. If it was me and I was in a fight with someone like this, I think I'd save the Baba tribute to a post-match interview. Otska even tried another of Baba's moves, and he only had about 3, the Russian leg sweep. That didn't work in a real fight either, as Vachenchin landed on top and started punching him from the top until time ran out. Otska's nose was pretty badly bloodied by the end. Vachenchin got an easy decision in a very good match. 8. Mark Kerr 243 United States, won a 2-0-1 decision over Enson Inoue 210 Japan, after 15 minutes. Kerr took Inoue down at the bell and basically held him down for almost the entire match. Kerr threw punches from the top and Inoue from the bottom, with Kerr's doing more damage, since Inoue got a bloody nose. There was a stand-up ordered late, but Kerr immediately took Inoue down again. Kind of boring spectator match. 9. Royce Gracie 178 Brazil, beat Nobuhiko Takada 215 Japan, in what was announced as a unanimous decision after the end of 15 minutes. This fight was really bad and left the show with a sour taste. Takada wasn't even in good shape. Gracie wore a gi. Gracie immediately took Takada down into his guard, and Takada hung onto Gracie's gi with his hands and put his head down and wouldn't let go. He tried nothing offensive. Gracie did really weak kicks while on his back to Takada's back and tried to choke him with his gi, but never came close. Fans started booing as the match drew on. Gracie threw some punches and palms to Takada's ears, but they weren't with enough impact to get Takada to move from his safe position. When the time limit expired, Takada got up limping. While Takada was the reason the match was a disgrace, this did expose just how far this world has changed in the 5 years since Gracie last fought under these rules, as Gracie basically had no way to hurt a guy whose main motive was to stall until the time limit as a way of saving his rep. January 30th, All Japan. 1. Tao Omori and Yoshihiro Takayama beat Kawada and Akira Taue in 1444. It was good to great when Kawada was in and okay to awful when Taue was in. Taue's work is declining to where in a few years he'll probably be near Baba level. The match fell apart, but Kawada's work made the finish exciting and it had a lot of heat. They continually worked on Kawada's eyes. Kawada kicked out of an axe bomber by Omori, then Taue saved him after a bombs away. Kawada came back with all kinds of awesome kicks before they started working on his eyes again. They hit a sandwich lariat on Taue, then doubled on Kawada, including Takayama delivering a leg drop, Omori a knee drop before Omori got the pin after an axe bomber. 2.25 stars. 2. Steve Williams pinned Mike Barton in 12:45. Only the last 4 minutes aired and it was all Williams. It was a total destruction which had great heat, since Japanese fans are all aware of the Williams knockout from the Brawl for All. Williams, whose physique changed completely since his recent WCW tenure, even did a tope near the finish, winning with a Dr. Bomb and a back suplex. What aired was really good. 3. Misawa and Akiyama beat Vader and Taue in 14 minutes. Only the last 4 minutes aired and it was very good, largely due to Akiyama and Vader, who both looked great again. Misawa is banged up but still did the elbow suicida, and didn't look happy about it the way he got up from the dive. Misawa eventually got the pin after 2 tiger drivers and a discus elbow. Mexico. The first Arena Mexico show of the millennium is February 11th, headlined by Villano Tercero defending the CMLL light heavyweight title against Atlantis plus Tarzan Boy and Negro Casas and Mr. Niebla and Emilio Charles Jr. versus El Satanico and Shocker and Bestia Salvaje and Scorpio Jr. They had one of those gimmick masked matches on February 3rd in Cuernavaca before a sellout 2,800 fans, starting as a Parejas Increíbles, Incredible Partners match, with the losers having to wrestle each other, and the loser of the match drops his mask. El Hijo del Santo and Fuerza Guerrera beat Blue Panther and Nuevo Huracan Ramirez Jr., which led to a singles match, and what a shock, Panther won. Ramirez was unmasked as Pedro Moreno, 45, of Mexico City. This is something of a big deal because it is the first time in 45 years of Lucha Libre that there hasn't been a famous Huracan Ramirez mask, whether it be an alleged relative of Huracan or later Ciclone. The IWRG wrestler who uses the name Rocambole Jr. is actually the nephew of Los Villanos. AAA is setting up a mask versus mask match with La Parca Jr. versus El Hijo del Espectro. AAA is back in Tijuana on February 11th with Espectro Jr. defending the Mexican national middleweight title against Oriental, and a main event of Heavy Metal and Parca Jr. and Pero Arguello Jr. versus El Texano and Kickboxer and Pentagon. Astro Ray Jr. defends his national welterweight belt against Dr. O'Borman Jr. on February 13th at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City, stemming from O'Borman pinning Astro Ray Jr. clean twice in a trios match on February 6th. The February 4th Arena Coliseo TV taping was headlined by Atlantis and Tarzan Boy and Emilio Charles Jr. over Villano Tercero and El Satanico and Fuerza Guerrera when Atlantis used the torture rack on V3. In the semi, Black Warrior totally unmasked Felino, who worked the end of the match without his mask. On the February 1st show in the same building, they had a tag team tournament which came down to Blue Panther and Rincor Latino over Olympico and Mr. Niebla via DQ, and resulted in Panther and Olympico ribbing masks and both juicing heavy, so they are setting up a program between those two which starts as a non-stip singles match on February 8th. Hater vs. Sergio Romo Jr. in a hair vs. hair match headlines AAA on February 13th in Monterrey. Woman wrestler Marcella, who has worked regularly with Big Japan Pro Wrestling, has threatened EMLL with a sexual discrimination lawsuit because they don't get booked on major arena shows. Others involved in the complaint are Andromeda, Amapola, La Rebelde, Lady Apache, La Diabolica, Flor Metallica, and Jocelyn. Rayo de Jalisco Jr. beat Grand Marcus Jr. on January 30th in Guadalajara in a mask versus hair match, so Marcus is now bald. Former wrestler Charles Bronson Mexicano, that was his ring name, real name Ishmael Ramirez, better known for doing Santo movies and for owning the largest gym in Mexico City, had a major heart attack on February 1st and was still hospitalized at press time. Box y Lucha magazine, in covering the death of El Jurassico, Felipe Flores, on January 22nd noted that the DF commissioner, Dr. Horacio Ramirez, revoked his license to wrestle when his 1999 annual checkup revealed that he had already suffered 2 heart attacks. As a spoof on EMLL wrestler Ricky Marvin, based on You Know Who, AAA is introducing a wrestler called Rocky Marvin. At the February 3rd IWRG TV tapings in Naucalpan, the main event was a battle royal inside a cage with the loser being unmasked. It came down to 2 of the Super Payasos, and Rody was the last man in, being unmasked as Simon Tlalpenchi, 28, of Puebla. On January 28th in Netzahualcoyot, Brazo de Plata and Felina were scheduled in the main event but had problems getting to the arena. There was a riot near the arena and the police wouldn't let anyone near the area, so they stalled out the show waiting for them. Finally at midnight, they sent the main event into the ring and put Solar and Tigre Blanco in their places. About 12:30 a.m. they finally were able to get to the arena, so after the first fall the originally scheduled main eventers walked to the ring and took their place in the match. All Japan. In a publicity stunt, Masaaki Sadake, coming off being destroyed by Mark Coleman in the Pride Tokyo Dome show on February 3rd, asked Mitsuharu Misawa to help train him for future matches. That's sort of a funny cultural difference between the two countries, as could you imagine Evander Holyfield, after losing to Lennox Lewis, doing a publicity stunt and asking The Rock to train him for the rematch? New Japan. Tatsumi Fujinami announced the Tokyo Dome show has been moved from April 10th to April 7th, and that most likely it'll be the 3rd, actually the 5th but the 3rd of this feud, singles match with Shinya Hashimoto vs Naoya Ogawa as the main event. As the story goes, Ogawa is saying he's done with Hashimoto and would rather have a match with Kensuke Sasaki for the title or a singles match against Yuji Nagata or Manabu Nakanishi. Fujinami said he's going to try and put together Sasaki vs Bill Goldberg for the IWGP Heavyweight title. There are a lot of obvious political problems with that match, and I don't expect it to happen even if Goldberg is physically ready by that date, which appears doubtful at this point. But just making that announcement tells you all you need to know, since the original plan was for Sasaki vs Nobuhiko Takada. Atsushi Onita said that he would go to the New Japan show on February 20th at Sumo Hall to challenge Riki Choshu, so that singles match would make sense on this show as well. New Japan is also talking about running an outdoor show in the summer at a 100,000-seat field featuring pro wrestling, Vale Tudo matches and women's martial arts matches. Ogawa and Kazunari Murakami issued a challenge to IWGP Tag Champs Nakanishi and Nagata for March 11th at the Rikitozen Memorial Show at the Yokohama Arena. There are also rumors of Yoji Anjo vs Tarzan Goto and Magnum Tokyo vs Jinsei Shinzaki on that show. New Japan has its own show on March 11th as well. The first of the annual 2 straight days in Sapporo, now moved to the Tsukism Green Dome, drew what was announced as a near sellout 6,500 fans with basically an all-star type lineup. The show was headlined by a best-of-4 series with NWO Japan vs Team 2000, with 2000 winning 3 out of the 4. It opened with Akira pinning Hiro Saito, followed by Scott Norton evening things up pinning Super J Don Fry, then beat Satoshi Kojima, and ending with Masahiro Chono using the STF on Hiroyoshi Tenzan in 1814. In addition, there were 3 title matches, all with the champions retaining the belts. IWGP Tag Champs Nakanishi and Nagata beat Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto in 1543 when Nagata pinned Ohara with a bridging back suplex. IWGP Junior Champ Jushin Liger, doing a Black Liger gimmick, pinned Minoru Tanaka with a brainbuster off the top rope in 504, another short match which may indicate something with Liger, or maybe it's just furthering a booking idea he has. IWGP Junior Tag Champs Shinjiro Otani and Tatsutoshi Takaiwa retained their titles, beating Kendo Kashin and Dr. Wagner Jr. in 1623 when Otani pinned Wagner with a spinning power bomb. Reports we got was that this was the best match on the show. In addition, Genichiro Tenryu and Shiro Koshinaka beat Sasaki and Kenzo Suzuki when Tenryu pinned Suzuki with a lariat in 737. Basically, Tenryu killed Suzuki. You have to see Tenryu live against a rookie to appreciate that last statement, as he destroyed him with killer chops and laid in the punches. After this series with Team 2000 winning, they are teasing both groups would join forces once again. As the storyline went, Chono and Saito have already had a secret meeting. NWO Japan fired Muto as their boss, and then on February 6, Chono had a meeting with the Freedom Dogs, Goto and Ohara, about bringing them into Team 2000, and then on February 8 Chono announced that Team 2000 had joined with NWO Japan and the Freedom Dogs to form one group, mentioning that Tenzan, Kojima, Saito, Norton, Goto and Ohara would be joining his group of Super J, Akira and Don Fry. It was also made clear that Muto wasn't going to be part of the new group. February 5 in the same building drew a sellout 6,800 for the Sasaki IWGP title defense over Fry, winning in 1402 after a clothesline. Also, Hashimoto and Iizuka beat Chono and Akira, Tenryu and Koshinaka beat Saito and Kojima, and Nagata beat Suzuki. January 29 TV show did a 3.3 rating. Other Japan notes. Tokyo Sports, which sometimes works its own angle so you never know how to take things, has reported on the front page on February 4 that a Suzukudo, a woman wrestler who was former male wrestler Gasaku Goshigawara who underwent a sex change in Thailand, will be debuting in their women's division in a handicap match on February 25 at Korakuen Hall against Kaori Nakayama and Emi Motokawa. FMW President Shoichi Arai was quoted in the article saying the person in question was a woman now, so he would book him in women's matches. This leads to even more of a freak show since FMW has been booking woman wrestler Kyoko Inoue in men's matches of late. Goshigawara is 23 years old and wrestled with FMW from 1993 through January of 1999 when he was fired, and at one time did a Sandman gimmick, so some of you seeing FMW tapes from a few years ago may remember the prelim guy who dressed and bleached his hair and did the ring entrance. Balls Mahoney and Crazy Boy are in for this tour as part of Team ECW. The Pride Show coverage took up the first 20 pages of this past week's Weekly Gong. Both magazines led off with the Fujita vs Nyman match coverage ahead of Gracie vs Takada. Weekly Pro Wrestling came out with its Shoot Readership Awards for 1999 this past week. For MVP, Muto beat out Misawa with 1,321 votes to 1,226. Kazushi Sakuraba, who actually only did one pro wrestling match the entire year, on a low-key amateur wrestling show, placed third with 412 votes, followed by Kobashi, Ogawa, Tenryu, Lioness Asuka, Onita, Nakanishi, and Chono. For New Wave Wrestler, pretty much translated meaning Rising Star of the Year, it was Sakuraba over All Japan Prelim wrestler Masamichi Marufuji, who will from this obviously be pushed to be a big star soon, by an 811 to 779 vote, with Takao Mori, 758, Magnum Tokyo, 755, and Shima, 691, all very close, followed by Nakanishi, Ogawa, Minoru Tanaka, Takayama, and Ayako Hamada. For Best Singles Match, the Misawa vs. Vader Tokyo Dome match on May 2nd won handily with 1,104 votes, beating out this newsletter's Misawa vs. Kobashi match on June 11th at Budokan, which got 883 votes. The remainder of the top 10 were Muto vs. Tenryu on May 3rd in Fukuoka, Misawa vs. Kawada on January 22nd in Osaka, Sakuraba vs. Royler Gracie on November 21st at Ariake Coliseum, Muto vs. Tenryu on December 10th in Osaka, Hashimoto vs. Ogawa on October 11th at the Tokyo Dome, Muto vs. Fry on April 10th at the Tokyo Dome, Kobashi vs. Vader on January 15th in Yokohama, and Muto vs. Sasaki on February 14th at Budokan Hall. The 1999 Tag Tourney Finals on December 3rd at Budokan Hall with Kobashi and Akiyama vs. Hansen and Taue was named Tag Team Match of the Year with 1,452 votes ahead of Kobashi and Akiyama vs. Takayama and Omori on October 30th at Budokan Hall, and both Kobashi and Akiyama vs. Misawa and Ogawa matches at 3 and 4, so Kobashi and Akiyama were in the top 4 tag matches of the year. For Women's Match of the Year, Tsuka vs. Chigusa Nagio on April 4th placed first, Manami Toyota vs. Kyoko Inoue on December 8th placed second, followed by Asuka vs. Nagio on September 15th, Asuka vs. Kyoko Inoue on August 22nd, and Asia Kong vs. Meiko Satomura on September 15th. Best Women's Tag Match was Ayako Hamada and Akino vs. Atsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda on December 11th in Yokohama, followed by Kong and Mayumi Ozaki vs. Satomura and Sonoko Kato on April 4th in Yokohama, Mita and Shimoda vs. Kumiko Makawa and Tomoko Watanabe on December 8th. Toyota and Kaoru Ito and Nani Takahashi vs. Mita and Shimoda at Asuka on July 11th, and Mita and Shimoda vs. Zaps on July 10th. For Best Foreigner, the top 6 were Vader, who won by a landslide, followed by the traditional sentimental votes for Hansen, who used to always win this award, then Curryman, Christopher Daniels, Don Fry, and Semishield. Best Winning Maneuver was Misawa's Emerald Frozen, Side Pile Driver, Nakanishi's Torture Rack, Kobashi's Burning Hammer, Rack into a Death Valley Bomb, and Kawada's Vertical Power Bomb, the move he used on Misawa on January 22nd. Show of the Year was All Japan's May 2nd Tokyo Dome, followed by FMW's November 23rd Yokohama card, All Japan September 18th Korakuen Hall Show, New Japan's January 4th Tokyo Dome, and New Japan's October 11th Tokyo Dome. Michinoku announced 3 major shows for early March, with March 1st in Nagoya headlined by Great Sasuke vs. Gran Hamada in honor of the 10th anniversary of Sasuke's pro debut. It's really scary to think about this, but not only did I actually see his first 3 pro matches, but I was in the car with him on the way home from his first match. Also March 4th in Tokushima has a rare Sasuke and Magnum Tokyo and Jinsei Shinzaki vs. Crazy Max Trios match, and March 11th in Yahaba has Sasuke defending the NWA middleweight title against Tiger Mask. AJW is doing an angle where Yumiko Hada is saying she doesn't like the joint shows with JWP because the wrestlers in that group aren't very good, and Hada didn't appear on the February 2nd joint show in a Tokyo Chinese restaurant. They shot an angle at a gym show on February 6th where Mita and Shimoda attacked Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Maikawa to set up a cage match on March 4th at Yokohama Bunka Gym. As mentioned here weeks back, Rings officially announced February 26th at Budokan Hall as a non-tournament match bout with Bobby Hoffman, the Extreme Challenge Heavyweight Champion, against Volkan. Mil Mascaras is in Japan currently for the CMLL Tour with brother Dos Caras, billed as Mascara's second-to-last tour of Japan before he retires. Of course, as we know, he'll never actually retire. Osaka Pro Wrestling had a TV show airing after midnight on January 4th only in Osaka and drew a 5.3 rating in that city, which is considered a huge success. Here and there are supposedly plans for a June 25th pay-per-view show promoted by AD Vision featuring Atsushi Onita in an exploding ring match in the United States for a match against Terry Funk, A rematch of their May 5, 1993 match at Kawasaki Baseball Stadium, which drew 41,000. New Jersey-based Combat Zone Wrestling, which has gotten some national publicity including being featured on ABC's Nightline, announced the show this week and will be involved in the promotion. In the CZW announcement, they said the show would also include another match with snakes, alligators and a piranha in various corners of the ring. Keep in mind that WWF King of the Ring is on June 25, so there is no way they are getting any serious clearance or buys for a live show. When asked on Wrestling Observer Live about a match with Onita in the United States more than a week back, Funk had said there had not even been anything in the works, but Funk also does not have an exclusive contract with WCW and is working on a show-to-show basis. No indie show has ever done profitable numbers on pay-per-view, and the latest attempt, the Heroes of Wrestling show, was a flop both inside and outside the ring. With ECW and WCW both hovering at not all that far above the profitability point on their pay-per-view shows, this doesn't appear to be the time to try this. In the early 90s, before the market was so cluttered and before there was any media pressure on the content of wrestling, the timing would have been a lot better for a concept like this, which may have worked then as a one-time curiosity. In addition, an indie group with no juice in the industry is going to find it difficult to get the established cable companies to break any new ground when it comes to hardcore style, especially with more negative publicity in the media toward extreme style. As far as a taping for the Japanese home video and television market, there would be an audience for an Onita vs. Funk match in the United States. The highlight of the February 5th Battle of Memphis television saw them shoot at least a TV angle between Triple H and Jerry Lawler. Triple H did an interview complaining about Lawler attacking him at the December 30th house show in Memphis. Lawler, who wasn't there, this was the second show taped on January 26th when Lawler couldn't be there because SmackDown tapings were moved back one day, did a taped interview and said there were two different kings, the one in WWF and one in Memphis, who took care of business in the ring. They were doing an angle where Bill Dundee and Van Harden were both running for commissioner, and the wrestlers would vote. Dundee said that everything at the strip club he ran would be on the house if a wrestler voted for him. Dundee had a phone conversation with Lawler, who hung up on him. They aired a 1979 Tupelo concession stand brawl, at the time this was a wrestling classic, with Lawler and Dundee versus Wayne Ferris, later Honky Tonk Man, and Larry Latham, later Moondog Spot. On PPW, they acted as if the promotion was in chaos. After all, that angle has done wonders for WCW's buy rates and TV ratings over the past few weeks. Not much of note on the show. They did a Jim Cornette versus Randy Hales match with all the heels as lumberjacks, but Hales pinned Cornette after a bulldog headlock, and Tracy Smothers, the new lead heel, hit Hales with a chair after the match. Headhunter number 1 has been out of action this past weekend for IWA due to not having medical clearance to wrestle. Sports Entertainment Group headed by Fred Rubenstein, Gino Moore and Joe Panzarino were accepted for NWA membership as NWA Jersey on February 5. This promotion was formerly NWA New Jersey when headed by Dennis Corraluzzo, so the acceptance were more of a formality than a new group joining. Mike O'Brien's Northeast promotion has withdrawn from the NWA after a dispute with President Howard Brody. XPW will hold a King of the Deathmatch tournament on February 26 from the Palace in Hollywood, California, featuring barbed wire, nails, glass, and thumbtacks. RF video at P.O. Box 797, Langhorne, Pennsylvania 19047 is selling a 4-hour videotape interview on the career of Tully Blanchard, which is said to be the most upfront of any of the series they've produced, for $24.95. The June 2000 issue of Wrestling Maniacs, put out by the Wrestling World People, has a story about myself written by longtime reader Kurt Brown. The photos are circa 1990. The story is really good, but the captions on some of the photos are totally hilarious. Dusty Rhodes is scouting a lot of small southern towns to promote indies under the name Turnbuckle Entertainment. John Williams, Ian Rotten IWA returned on February 4 in Charleston, Indiana before a sellout 365 fans. Axl Rotten was there and said he was back to stay. They also announced Reckless Youth and Big Dick Dudley heading in. MMA. Regarding the confrontation between Ken Shamrock and former UFC fighter Mark Hall, best known for his surprise win over Koji Kiao when he broke the former pro wrestling star's nose, which led to a series of matches in Japan. On February 5 at the King of the Cage show on an Indian reservation in San Jacinto, California, an eyewitness described it to us as Hall starting the fight by headbutting Shamrock, and Shamrock totally destroying him in seconds, bloodying his nose with a punch. Apparently this story started some time back when Hall asked Shamrock to do a radio spot for a fight, which he did, but Hall didn't like the spot and apparently called his house and called his wife names. Hall came up, apparently loaded with false courage, threw a light headbutt and shoved Shamrock. Shamrock punched Hall hard in the nose and was on him when security pulled them apart. Shamrock at that show said that the Pride show would air on pay-per-view in the United States, but thus far we don't have any confirmation of that. Royce Gracie is already making noises about pulling out of the May 1st Pride Tokyo Dome tournament. There is no upside in him going on anyway. His complaint was that Pride officials had agreed his match would have unlimited rounds and would go until a conclusive decision. He basically said the unanimous decision was a cover and Takada wasn't willing to fight a second round. This much is true, and thus he should have been declared the winner by TKO and not by decision, and said he wouldn't come back unless that finish was officially changed. Pride officials had asked for fans to send responses to a poll to help choose the first round matchups in the final 8. What was interesting about the poll is that it was clear the respondents were all hardcore MMA fans and still blinded by the Gracie myth, as well as the difference between that small percentage of the audience and the people who actually buy the tickets. Fujita, who was the most over guy on the show because of being the Inoki rep and New Japan connection, wasn't figured into the balloting, which saw Gracie versus Sakuraba as the top vote-getting match, and if Gracie were to come back, almost assuredly that would be the match promoters would try to make for numerous reasons, since they are closest in size and because it's to the promoters' advantage for Gracie's first loss in MMA competition to come to one of their regulars. In order, the other matches asked for were Gracie versus Kerr, Coleman versus Vovchanchyn, Kerr versus Vovchanchyn, Gracie versus Vovchanchyn, Gracie versus Coleman, Vovchanchyn versus Sakuraba, Coleman versus Goodridge, Kerr versus Goodridge, and Sakuraba versus Coleman. Todd Sermon, the Stanford University assistant wrestling coach who is a national caliber active wrestler that passed away 15 minutes before the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve while partying in Las Vegas falling off a high lamp post, this got a lot of publicity locally and a decent amount nationally as well, was a regular wrestling training partner of Frank Shamrock. The only match talked about for the March 10th UFC show besides the main event is Dave Mena versus Fabiano Iha, both of whom are coming off high-profile losses in Japan to Kiyoshi Tamura and Frank Trigg, respectively. The Full Contact Fighter website had listed an Alfonso Alcaraz versus Jens Pulitzer match, which would be a rematch of their September 24th dark match, which was a very exciting draw, but Alcaraz has since pulled out. Basically, aside from Kevin Randleman versus Pedro Rizzo, there will be no big-name fighters on the show because of the tight budget. Another fight agreed to, which should be a great fight, at least on paper, is Bob Cook, who is a Frank Shamrock student who is unbeaten in small fights in this area, including the fastest KO I've ever seen in something like 2.5 seconds, against Trigg, who is a national caliber wrestler who can punch and is unbeaten in MMA and has physically dominated some good people including Jean-Jacques Machado. One of the matches scheduled for the April UFC show at this point looks to be Tito Ortiz against either Eugene Jackson or Yoji Anjo. February 27th Pancrase show in Osaka is headlined by Ryushi Yanagisawa versus Sanae Kikuta for the number 6 ranking in Pancrase and Genki Sudo versus Kyuma Kunyoku. ECW. The injury to Rob Van Dam is a combination of a broken ankle and a broken fibula, and he's expected out of action for 3 months. The injury to Jerry Lynn is also more serious than first thought, which leaves them somewhat stripped of talent going into the pay-per-view on March 12th in Danbury, Connecticut. Nothing is official, but the most likely main event will be Awesome defending against Tanaka. Heyman chose that match because it's guaranteed good, rather than giving Sandman a quick push to a title match because he felt Awesome versus Sandman wouldn't deliver in the ring even if it sold a few more buys. They did an angle at TV regarding the TV title, trying to make TNN the heels, as TNN ordered Spike Dudley to defend the title on the February 5th Tallahassee taping because they didn't care about Van Dam and only cared about having a title match on to build up the lead-in for Roller Jam. They use Cyrus as the heel voice of TNN. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen, attempting to get the TV station that carries the product and its programming over as the heels, hurting the company. They most likely will have Rhodes versus Corino in a bull rope match on the show. TNN taping was February 5th in Tallahassee, Florida, before about 2,000 fans, somewhat papered as there were free tickets around town. Plus, the night before in Jacksonville they announced anyone with a ticket at that show could attend the next night, showing their ticket stub. Among the highlights were during and Roadkill beating Chetty and Nova, and after the match Storm and Credible attacked and laid out both teams. They did an open where they talked about Van Dam being out for 3 months, and there was something said about the TV title and Spike Dudley defending it against both Dupp brothers, who he beat. Both Dupes have already signed developmental contracts with the WWF, so they aren't going to be pushed past a certain level here. Super Crazy beat C.W. Anderson in a good match. Balls Mahoney beat Vic Grimes in a match which included Grimes taking a bump through a flaming table. Dreamer beat Whipwreck. James Vandenberg was managing Whipwreck. At one point Vandenberg went to throw powder at Francine but Raven saved her. Raven, who was blinded, then accidentally DDTs Francine and Dreamer attacked him. Vandenberg then started consoling Raven. Credible beat Raven in what was said to be Raven's best match since returning. Storm interfered and they did the spinning tombstone on a chair and both Paul Heyman and Cyrus ran in and they stopped the match. Apparently the reason it was Raven's best match may have come from the fact he and Paul Heyman had a big argument behind the scenes just before the match started. Heyman wanted Raven to be laid out for roadkill and during to make the save and do a stretcher job. Raven complained because when laying out the Awesome vs Tanaka match, they were laying out spot after spot which looked more damaging than the move that was supposed to lay him out for a stretcher job, and they were both going to get up from all the spots. After the angle, Corino then came out and challenged Rhodes, who came out. Corino and Rhino tried to break Rhodes' leg with a bull rope. They seemed to be doing Rhodes vs Corino in a bull rope match on the pay-per-view, before Sandman saved. Main event saw the typical really good Awesome over Tanaka title match. Highlights from the February 4th show in Jacksonville before 1,500 saw Tao beat Crazy in a Japanese death match by piling 15 to 20 chairs on Crazy, then a table, then coming off the top rope with a double foot stomp through the table and onto the chairs for the pin. This was said to have been the best match of the weekend. Tao was injured as Crazy came off the top rope outside the ring with a leg drop on the table and Tao's neck and shoulder were injured, taking the move to the point he couldn't work the next night. Match was double juice. Main event was a street fight with Rhodes and Dreamer over Corino in victory with Dreamer and Rhodes both doing elbow drops for the finish. Said to have been a lot better than the TV match. Rhino attacked Rhodes after and Sandman saved. TNN show from Fort Lauderdale, Florida was pretty uneventful. They opened with the same Gertner/Cyrus angle which was pretty humorous as usual. Then came an angle where Van Dam attacked Awesome in the dressing room, ending with Spike Dudley giving Jeff Jones the acid drop. The angle seemed to be designed to get Jones away from Awesome, although Jones was working this past weekend behind the curtain doing ring announcing. Rhodes and Dreamer beat Corino and Rhino in 8:55. Before the match started they showed James Vandenberg, Jim Mitchell, giving Raven counseling and Paul Heyman yelling at Vandenberg to leave and Raven complaining Heyman never returns his phone calls. The match was really bad. The crowd was into Rhodes since it was his old stomping grounds but not as much as you'd think. It reminded me of the last time I saw Ray Stevens wrestle at the Cow Palace when he was actually younger than Dusty is now and the fans cheered him, but not much, and it was painfully clear in everyone's eyes he was washed up. Rhodes did one of the worst figure fours ever, which is something to say since he probably started doing the move 26 years ago. They did a spot where Rhodes, Dreamer and Francine all did figure fours and Francine was the only one who did it right. Corino juiced and Rhodes pinned him with an elbow drop. They aired promos with Storm and Credible and Dawn Marie and then during and Roadkill and Elektra, both women wearing bikinis in the promo. Finale was Van Dam over Whipwreck in 7:54 with a splash. It was a decent match. Nobody believes any near falls by Whipwreck against a top guy, especially Van Dam. TNN sent out a press release listing ECW as winning its time slot among males 12 to 34 on cable with 510,000 viewers in that demo on average during January, beating USA Network movies at 409,000 and NBA on TNT at 283,000. The Westchester County Center, which ECW packed for its December 23 TV taping and was planning on running a pay-per-view from later this year, won't be allowing them back in the building due to problems from the show. The story we'd heard the morning after the show was that there would be no pay-per-view in the building because the straw that broke the camel's back was an obscenity-laced promo by Paul Heyman in the ring. Heyman claimed the show was off because of the building complaining about the level of violence in the show and certain chants, in specific "show your tits," made by the audience. Elektra, the ringside eye candy for during and Roadkill, is questionable after missing the weekend because she freaked out after a problem regarding her flight to Florida taking off, and she has something of a fear of flying, and she got off the plane. WCW. Bobby Duncombe Jr.'s death is being labeled an accidental overdose from a prescription painkiller called fentanyl, which can be up to 100 times stronger than morphine. Duncombe Jr. did not have a prescription for the drug, which is administered by a patch. He got them from a family member. Super Brawl lineup for February 20th at this point is Vicious vs. Jarrett for the title, which more likely than not will be changed to a three-way involving Hall, Flair vs. Funk, possibly with I Quit Stips added. Bagwell vs. Page was scheduled but at this point it is doubtful. Hogan vs. Luger, Vampiro vs. Kidman, Booker vs. Stevie Ray with the winner getting the rights to the name Harlem Heat. Marmaduke's defending against David Flair and Crowbar vs. Big Al and probably Sabu vs. Demon along with the Cruiserweight tourney finals. at this point scheduled as Artist vs. LaRue, plus Smiley vs. 3 Count in a handicap match. The movie Ready to Rumble, which was produced by Warner Brothers and features a lot of WCW characters, is scheduled for April 14th release. Based on the trailer that aired on Nitro this week, it looked really bad, although I'd bet the wrestling action sequences are great with all the retakes, etc. Goldberg was at the Nitro in Tulsa, because he grew up there. He didn't appear on camera but came in to be introduced once the TV show ended. Hogan vs. Flair, as has been proposed for nearly 2 months but now officially, will be the main event for the February 14th Nitro, going unopposed at the Nassau Coliseum. Sting, at press time, and you know how things change, is scheduled to return either on February 20th or February 21st. A correction in that the DDP Bagwell feud has not been canned. DDP submitted a detailed booking proposal on January 31st carrying the feud through February 21st, and there were a lot of pre-tapes involving Bagwell scheduled for that show, but Bagwell didn't come because of a flaring up his neck problem. He's also booked a long-term detailed angle. Of course, that is also now up in the air since DDP suffered what appears to be a serious back injury on February 3rd in Charleston, South Carolina. He was scheduled for an MRI on February 8th but can't sit down, and a preliminary diagnosis was a ruptured disc, which isn't good. Nitro on February 7th in Tulsa, Oklahoma drew 5,308 paid, plus 1,050 comps, for a $107,290 gate. 3 Count came out and Smiley screwed up their music in the truck. Smiley beat Karagias in 136 by reversing a rolling reverse cradle. They showed Danny Hodge at ringside watching the show, cheering on Smiley for some reason. Smiley challenged all three to a 3-on-1 match at Super Brawl. NWO came out and did an interview. In an unscheduled display of the inmates running the asylum, Steiner went off on Flair for several minutes with an obscenity-laced tirade filled with what jealous wrestlers say behind Flair's back because of his knack to stay over and because some of his personality traits can be transparent. Steiner called Flair a joke, basically blaming him for the problems WCW is in, said WCW sucks, which is the last thing anyone needs to be saying on its own TV shows at this point, said when Flair did his interview the previous week. Everyone switched from WCW to WWF on television to see Steve Austin, who Flair got fired. Since when did Flair manipulate Bischoff's stupid decisions? From the company in the first place. Of course, given the track record of the two as ratings draws, there is quite a bit of humor in Steiner complaining about people switching the channels when Flair is on. Steiner went so long that a segment or two on the show had to be eliminated. WCW management sent Steiner home from Thunder as a disciplinary reason, but the problem with the company, as Hall's track record shows, is that they'll just bring him back and headline with the guy, and the company will be worse off in the long run for it. On Tuesday, the guys weren't taking the being sent home seriously, just figuring Steiner's punishment was he got a day off from the road with pay. Wall beat Booker in 310 with a choke slam when Booker was distracted by Jay Biggs and 2 policemen looking to arrest him for assault, reckless endangerment, and attempted murder. Don't they read the newspapers and realize there is no murder in wrestling? That's the NFL. Funk confronted Anderson again. Abbott knocked out Barbarian in 52 seconds. Oklahoma did an interview about the women's division with this lame actor as a doctor who said they surgically enhanced just about every one of Medusa's body parts. Medusa came out wearing the shortest shorts ever seen on a wrestling show and assaulted and reckless endangered. She was wearing ridiculous heels and could have easily lost her balance throwing kicks, and then so much silicone could have exploded in the ring that it would become an unsafe working environment. The doctor in Oklahoma with kicks to the head. Taylor came out and said that WCW couldn't change Jarrett's matches, but they could change the stips for the matches, saying Vicious vs. Hall was a world title match, like, if you use logic, that's bad for the NWO, and that Mark Johnson wouldn't ref the main event at Super Brawl. They showed clips of the Flair vs. Funk I Quit match from 1989, and Mark Madden put the match over. At least it was a great match at the time. David Flair beat Funk in an I Quit match in 6:26. Flair used a lot of chair shots early before Funk piledrove him on the mat, on the unprotected floor, and on a table. They made a big deal about that being the same spot as the 1989 angle which started the Flair-Funk feud and said it broke Rick's neck. The idea is Funk kept nearly killing David and begged for Rick to come out and stop the carnage. Rick never came out. Finally, in the end, Funk turned face and said I quit and ran down Flair for not coming out. It was actually a brilliant idea to turn Rick heel, but we've been down that road before. Funk put on a great performance as well, going from heel to face at the end, but he's been booked and portrayed in such a way that modern fans aren't going to go for him. Flair means nothing today as a heel, even if he knows better than anyone how to play the role, but he refuses to go face. Anderson did a great promo saying he was mad at all of civilization, and he couldn't side with Funk for what he just did, but didn't want to be near Rick for dancing around with women and being a bad parent. Stevie Ray beat Disco in 2:21. Big T and the Marmadukes were booted from ringside early. In a hardcore title match, Bigelow beat Knobbs in 2:13 to win the title. Finlay was ref and first helped Knobbs, giving him a garbage can, which made perfect sense since the two are feuding. He then hit Knobbs with a weak chair shot and put Bigelow on top. Actually, that did make sense. Kidman beat Demon in 2:40 with a Frankensteiner off the top. Demon is so bad he makes Kidman look bad. That's Demon and Wall in a row. They are doing an angle where Crowbar is in love with the Demon and he jumped Kidman after the match. Luger came out and called himself the Cal Ripken of wrestling. I guess he thinks he broke some record he should be proud of when he was in 2,131 straight bad matches. They showed a clip of the angle from Thunder, including a replay of that atomic drop on Liz. Jimmy Hart came out. Hart did the second best promo on the show, so that should guarantee him not getting any TV time. The segment was much better than if Hogan was actually there, with Hart saying more people watch Hogan go out every morning to get his mail than pay to see Luger when he main events house shows. While true, it's not exactly something WCW needs to be advertising about itself on its own TV this week. Luger racked Hart at the end. TV main was Vicious versus Hall for the title. Hall treated the match like it was a joke. A ref bump and Hall hit the outsider's edge. Jarrett ran down and hit Hall with a guitar because Hall winning the title would keep him from getting the title at Super Brawl, and then put Vicious on top at 3:38. Jarrett ended the show telling the Harris twins they had to make a choice. There were some slight rearrangements of the hierarchy. The head booker is Sullivan, assistant booker is Taylor, head television writer is Ferrara, and television editor is Shuvani. Russo was offered the head writer position but has refused unless he's the one running the entire show, and refused to come back as part of a booking committee because I guess his contract gives him control of creative. Bush, at the last statement, suggested the two go their separate ways, but Russo isn't looking at giving up his big money contract that easily. Thunder on February 8th in Oklahoma City opened with matches taped for Worldwide, with Ice Train returning, beating Bobby Walker and Rhonda Singh over Mona with Medusa as ref to start off the women's division. Thunder had LaRue over Moore to go to the finals of the Cruiserweight tournament with lots of interference from Smiley and 3 count. Jarrett did an interview announcing the Harris brothers versus Vicious and Funk. He did the interview giving the idea he's giving Vicious the worst partner possible, like it was a handicap to have Funk as a partner. Hall and Jarrett argued about Nitro, and then on the screen popped Kevin Nash via satellite, legit, as Dr. James Andrews wouldn't allow him to fly, who said he was taking over as commissioner because Jarrett screwed his best friend Hall, and announced Jarrett versus Hall as the TV main, with the winner getting a title match at Super Brawl. Bigelow beat Demon in a hardcore title match. Knobbs attacked Bigelow after the match. Vicious and Funk did an interview with Funk saying he had a surprise for Flair later in the show. Booker NC Stevie Ray. Kidman beat Crowbar with a Frankensteiner off the top in a pretty good match. Flair did an interview saying he'd wrestle Hogan at Nassau and said he'd do a live interview later in the show. Harris twins beat Vicious and Funk. Jarrett was out doing commentary. Funk set up a table between the apron and the guardrail a la SABU. He was about to put one of the twins through the table with a moonsault when Jarrett got up and hit Funk with the guitar. Funk took a Nestia plunge backwards through the table. Vicious and Jarrett brawled to the back, leaving Funk with the twins, and he was pinned. Luger announced he was joining forces with Flair and would face Funk on February 14th at the Nassau Coliseum. Luger beat Finlay when Liz hit Finlay with the bat a few times, and they did the broken wrist gimmick with the chair with Finlay. Knobbs and Finlay fought afterwards. Marmadukes kept the tag titles, beating Idol and Lane, Lenny and Lodi due to interference from Disco. However, Crowbar and Daphne came out during the match and stole the belts from ringside and left. Miller did an interview and said that James Brown was there. He wasn't, but had already left, but would be there again at the Nassau Coliseum. I don't know if that's a definite, but it is the working plan for him to actually be on Nitro. Flair did what was described as a great interview, bringing out the WCW magazine that listed the 100 greatest wrestlers of all time as Hogan #1 and Flair #2. He attacked the magazine and laid it out, although he did not put a figure 4 leg lock on the magazine. Dustin Rhodes came out as Funk's surprise and said what he saw with David reminded him of when he was a kid and his father abandoned him to be a TV star, but said he and his dad had become friends. They ended up having Flair versus Rhodes in street clothes, and Rhodes had Flair in the figure 4, but Flair hit Rhodes with a loaded Rolex for the pin. Hall versus Jarrett had no ending to set up the planned 3-way on pay-per-view. Hall hit the edge, but ref Mickey J was bumped. Mark Johnson came out and Jarrett hit the stroke for the pin. Jay got up and overruled Johnson and ordered the match to continue. The match ended with a non-decision as each ref raised the other's hand. Thunder on February 1st in Binghamton, New York, opened with an NWO interview where Marcus Johnson became a heel NWO ref, as Yogi Berra would say, deja vu all over again. He then riffed half the show and didn't play heel at all. He'll ref the Sid vs. Jarrett match at Super Brawl, but apparently then he'll play heel. Just what WCW needs with buy rates in freefall and the title meaning nothing is to tell fans ahead of time there is going to be a biased ref ending of the title match. I guess someone figured that out since on Nitro they dumped the stipulation. Next came this elaborate ring entrance for Demon. It boggles the mind they would go to all the work of special effects for a new gimmick and make the gimmick a total jobber. Smiley beat him with the chicken wing in 154, but not before Demon stripped Smiley, who was wearing a demon costume, down to his bra and panties. Whoops, that's the other promotion. Lenny and Lodi revealed their new gimmick, trying to be Hardy Boys knockoffs, as 2XS. But WCW Legal has since nixed that name. They made it clear that they aren't gay because they talked about going to bars and chasing rats. I guess that makes them cats. In the first of 3 Sid matches, he beat Rotunda in a submission match with a crossface in 240. Sid's punches are the worst in the business. Moore beat Helms in a cruiserweight title tourney match in 330 with kind of a backslide bomb. Moore did this awesome running flip dive and it was so impressive that Mike Tenay and Evan Karagias, bickering on commentary, didn't stop for even a second to acknowledge it. Why put a guy who can't talk like Karagias on the mic so much? I know the young guys need mic time, but until they are halfway ready for prime time, train them off camera. Moore and Helms flew around but totally lacked psychology at this point, so the match was like a really good indie match. They showed cruiserweight tourney brackets with the finals February 20th at Super Brawl at the San Francisco Cow Palace. The semifinals are Psychosis vs. Taft Copy, Artist, and LaRue vs. Moore. Why have a cruiserweight title tournament when the best cruiserweight in the company that isn't hurt Kidman isn't in it because he's too big a star for that division? They should just call it the Jobber World Title. Sort of like if the NBA had a slam dunk contest for only players under 6 feet tall, like are there more than 1 or 2 anyway? And then some guys who were less than 6 feet started doing cooler dunks than the big guys, so they changed the contest and took everyone who could do cool dunks out of the under 6 feet division, but still had a contest and couldn't understand why nobody cared about the outcome. Hogan came out. He actually got a bigger pop than Flair did the previous night, but pops and ratings are not the same thing. He ripped on the comedy. He never explained the deal with Sting at Havoc, why he was gone, or anything. Nice to screw people on the front end and not have it mean something on the back end. Actually now Sting and Goldberg are all friends looking to revive WCW. He ripped on those young guys who think they are stars, especially youthful Luger. What about young guys like Piper, Flair and Macho Man who think they are stars? Luger and Liz came out with a fake Sting in the shadows pointing a bat at Luger and then taking off the wig to everyone knows they really didn't see Sting. Hogan laid Lex and Liz out, including giving Elizabeth the single worst atomic drop in history, made even better by the single worst sell job of an atomic drop in history. Earlier in the show, Medusa demanded to Jarrett they have a women's division. Jarrett then put Oklahoma in charge of booking the women's division, which is actually a shoot as they want a comedy women's division like WWF and Ferrara is in charge of it. That should be a waste of TV time. Wall won a 3-way over Vampiro and Kidman when he choke-slammed Vampiro off the top in 238. Wall looked totally lost and this match was a complete mess. They pushed Wall like he was the star of this match and made the other two look not even competitive with him. It's so weird to hear about ideas in the direction of Flair versus Kidman as a feud to elevate Kidman, and until that happens, they're getting him ready for Flair by doing jobs for Vampiro and Wall. While they may be an item in real life, on camera, Kidman being with Tori Wilson does neither any favor in the long run. She needs a higher profile position, and if she does get over, the last thing he needs is to be Mark Marrow where the eye candy becomes the act and he becomes the background. Sid beat Rick Steiner in a hardcore match when someone from backstage hit both men with baseball bats but Sid fell on top for the pin. A really bad match but fans liked it because Sid went through a table on a suplex. DDP beat Machine Emery Hale under a mask in 359 with the Diamond Cutter. They gave Machine a huge build-up the entire show and then he jobbed in his debut. Hale looks to have potential. He did do the single worst crotch shot maybe in the history of wrestling. He was on the top and DDP shook the ropes. He stood there on the top as time stood still, seemingly forever, jumped off and crotched himself. Arn Anderson did an interview basically saying he was caught in the middle between Flair and Funk and didn't want to take sides and wanted them to work together for WCW. He talked about the good old days of wrestling when two great athletes went in there, gave their sweat and had those long classic matches, etc. Then he mentioned two of those great athletes that made him proud to be in this profession because of their great output in the ring, rather than bringing a bird or a snake to the ring. Dusty Rhodes and Hulk Hogan. The thing about Anderson's interviews that are so great is he can say something either perceptive or ridiculous with the same straight face and make it sound equally believable. Abbott knocked out both Viano 4 and 5-5 in 101. They played up the Big Al angle and also teased a future match with Meng. Abbott actually left the ring before the ref counted them knocked out. Funk confronted Anderson and asked where he stood. Anderson asked if he had listened to him on the interview. I was thinking the same thing. In a non-title match, David Flair and Crowbar beat the Marmadukes in 5:45. Daphne had a confrontation with Miss Hancock. Tons of timing problems here, even when David wasn't in the ring. Johnny and Crowbar really looked green. Vito at one point nearly killed David with a missed knee drop as David actually moved into the path of the knee instead of away from it. Finally, Sid beat the Harris twins in a handicap cage match in 3:53. Sid sold the whole match so it got a lot of heat, but the work was awful. He choke slammed and pinned Ron. After the match, Hall forced the guy at cage control to lift the cage and Jarrett and Steiner hit the ring. Of course we then, even in a post-produced show, missed seeing Jarrett hit Sid with the guitar and they spray painted him to end the show. Another in the string of really bad thunders. Sting did an interview on the WrestlingObserver.com website with Alex Merves. When asked about people seemingly not having an idea of what to do with his character, he said, "Nobody feels the frustration of it more than I do. We had a really good thing going. I know what happened. To give all the reasons would take too much time. But when things are really working, people find a way to try and break you down because nobody wants you to be too successful. I'm speaking of people within the wrestling business." Vince Russo, who's not with us anymore, told me when I come back he'd like to have me come back as the scary man who comes down from buildings. I don't know what happened with that and how it would come across from a Mark's standpoint, if that's a favorite thing they would like to see go again. But I don't know if it's also one of those been there, done that ideas. I don't know if it would work again. He said he was originally scheduled to return on the February 14th Nitro, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. He also said there's been talk of him coming back in his 80s blonde flat-top gimmick, but he said that he doesn't want to do that. Goldberg did an interview for February 9th in WrestlingObserver.com with Merves. His injuries included a severed tendon. He needed 31.5 liters of blood and was within 1 centimeter of losing usage of his arm. He said that after his match where he lost the title to Nash, "From that point on my career went downhill. I believe that to be an indication of the inability of the people responsible there to do their job, I guess." Despite reports that Goldberg was one of the people who wanted Russo back, his comment on that subject was, "The new writers we brought in made me sick. I'm not Steve Austin and Bill Bush isn't Vince McMahon." He said he's learned that in wrestling you can't trust anyone and that everybody wants something for themselves. He said he's not schooled in the business long enough to rest his career on his own ideas, but he's going to have a hand in everything that happens to him from this point forward. He also said, "I'm sick of making people look good. I'm sick of sacrificing my character time and time again for, I don't want to say no payback or return, but I don't think what has been done has been effective in building my character." He also hinted at doing shoot fight matches. There has been talk, and I don't know how serious that is, about him doing a match for Pride. My feeling is it's a bad business move for him to fight legit because the risks are greater than the potential rewards. Hogan was on the Bubba the Love Sponge show on February 7th and joined the list of those ripping on WCW for not putting him on Nitro that night, saying the company won't spend money to make money. He was particularly hard on Kidman, saying that Kidman wouldn't even be able to headline a flea market wrestling show and said WCW needs to stick with Goldberg, Sting, Savage and himself to bring in the ratings. He said if he's not on Nitro, he can't give them high quarter hours or adequately build up his match with Luger. He also put over the job McMahon is doing with WWF, saying it's no wonder WWF is kicking their butts when WCW has him but won't use him on TV and they use guys like Kidman as main eventers. Since when has Kidman had a main event? The latest as it regards Conan and Douglas. WCW is trying to get Douglas to sign his release but he's refusing to do so. At this point there isn't even any dialogue going on regarding bringing him back. Conan did have a meeting scheduled on February 10th but there is no guarantee he'll be asked back either. Michael Landsberg of TSN's Off the Record has opened negotiations with WCW about going in together on a wrestler biography weekly television show. He had originally pitched the idea to WWF but negotiations fell through. Some of you will find this humorous. WCW made this announcement in Germany regarding this weekend's tour. Kevin Nash feels sorry for not participating at the tour. Although he broke his foot, he really wanted to come to Germany, but his doctor told him that he is unable to make the flight. There are plans to use Mark Coleman with a push and possibly Don Fry and Brian Johnston, although nothing conclusive. The problem with Fry and Johnston is their New Japan commitments, because they'll be gone so often, that actually in their case, or at least Fry's, if done correctly, that's an advantage that he won't be available every week, so he's not overexposed too early. Abbott was originally supposed to wrestle Barbarian on the January 31st Nitro and do an angle with Big Al. But when Barbarian no-showed, the segment was scrapped. Rick Steiner won the Buckmasters Classic Hunting Championship, which ended on January 29th in Benton, Alabama, which is a pretty famous celebrity hunting competition that generally several wrestlers participate in every year. Steiner won the big buck competition, killing the smallest winning deer in history under what was described as poor hunting conditions all weekend. Due to an error in scoring, Steiner left Alabama to go to Nitro on January 31st in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, not knowing that he was even the winner and nobody could find him for the awards ceremony. The new announcing teams are Schiavone and Madden on Nitro, Tenay and Heenan on Thunder, Hudson and Zbyszko on Saturday night, and the pay-per-view team will be Schiavone and Madden and Tenay. The best announced show over the past month has been Thunder with Hudson, Tenay and Schiavone as a three-man team, but I guess nobody noticed, so they're all broken up. The only answer I can find is that since WWF has two-man teams, they figure one of the problems is three-man teams. The problem isn't two or three-man. The problem is the role of the announcers portrayed to have no credibility with the audience, and they could have one man or 10 men, and as long as that's the case, nothing is going to change. WCW has asked Hart to make appearances at the Germany shows since he was at one point the biggest wrestling star, and among the biggest sports stars, in that country in the early part of the decade. Bagwell apparently aggravated his previous neck injury, which is why he missed TV last week. Several WCW Power Plant/Saturday Night wrestlers, including Alan Funk, Elix Skipper, Chuck Palumbo and Rick Cornell, debuted this past week for Burt Prentice's NWA Worldwide promotion. Goldberg was on WSCR in Chicago, and when asked about turning WCW around, he said it was like trying to cure cancer, saying that you don't know if you can fix it until you try. Thunder tapings February 1st in Binghamton, New York drew 2,323 paid and 1,605 comps, paying $52,518. February 2nd Saturday night tapings in Amherst, Massachusetts drew 886, paying $17,323. February 3rd house show in Charleston, South Carolina drew 3,419, paying $69,645. February 4th house show in Columbia, South Carolina drew 2,187 fans, 400 shy of capacity at the Old Township Auditorium, paying $44,560. February 5th in Savannah, Georgia drew 3,297, paying $60,910. February 6th in Wichita, Kansas drew 2,034, paying $44,616. The house shows in Columbia and Savannah were headlined by Flair over Luger with the figure 4 using the ropes. Flair made fun of Luger before the match, saying that his dressing room was near the women's dressing room and that he overheard Liz saying that Luger was really the little package. Flair played total face before the match but wrestled his same heel style in the ring, and got nothing but cheers. The semi was Vito and Johnny over David Flair and Crowbar. They did something different starting on February 3rd in Charleston. Page vowed he'd beat Kanyon in less than 1 minute with the Diamond Cutter, which he did. Kanyon then vowed he'd beat Page in less than 1 minute and had him pinned at 55 seconds, but Page kicked out and Page ended up winning again. They did a similar scenario the next night, except with Bigelow in Page's shoes since he replaced Page due to the back injury. The February 3rd Charleston show was headlined by Vicious over Jarrett, which also headlined February 6th in Wichita, which also had a match which went nearly 30 minutes where Flair put Funk over with the spinning toe hold. Flair did everything once again from ring work before the match to working total heel during to get the crowd to turn on him, but they cheered him anyway. In Wichita, they did the same DDP Kanyon deal, but this time with Dustin Rhodes, who beat Kanyon in 30 seconds, and Kanyon challenged him to a rematch and lost again. They also did a 30 seconds match where Bigelow beat Luger when Liz sprayed something accidentally in Luger's eyes in a 1 minute Abbott over Flynn match. All of their house show matches are less than 2 minutes, although in their case, that's what it needs to be. WWF. Variety on February 2nd had a story, which ended up leading to WWF's stock going up more than a full point, before the huge drop the next day with a football announcement. about both CBS and Fox trying to buy WWF stock and land exclusive deals with the WWF TV franchise for both network and cable. The story said that Viacom/CBS was convinced as late as a week ago that it had a deal which would keep SmackDown on UPN, which is owned by Viacom/CBS, and shift the cable shows to TNN, also owned by Viacom/CBS. The offer would have included a large cash payment for equity in the company and would have included mass marketing of WWF on MTV, which Viacom/CBS also owns, on CBS Radio and across all websites owned by Viacom and CBS. The article didn't indicate a reason the deal fell apart. Right now USA Network's contract with the WWF for every show except Raw expires in September. Raw contract is up September of 2001, but there is said to be an escape clause before that time. While TNN is a much lower rated network than USA, it is available in virtually as many homes, TNN in 75.8 million homes and USA in 77.2 million, and a switch to the lower rated network with WWF's brand loyalty these days would likely have only a minimal effect on ratings, but it absolutely would cause a slight drop. The Fox story, which, despite denials from Rupert Murdoch, who has said his network has no interest in carrying pro wrestling, has actually been going on for some time. McMahon claimed this week he had never met with Murdoch, which could be true, but many different people in Fox have had meetings with many different people in wrestling, both in and out of WWF, for a good 2 years, and they've expressed a lot of seriousness about getting into the wrestling business, and there have been meetings as late as this week with people not affiliating with WWF. Last year, just before the Owen Hart death, Fox reportedly made a serious offer to buy the WWF. The story said Fox would buy an equity stake in WWFE and it would result in SmackDown moving to the Fox network, which is available in about 15 million more homes than UPN, and the USA shows moving to FX, which would be a big blow at first since FX is only in 45.1 million homes. Although this deal can't go down for years anyway, and having the WWF would lead to most systems picking up the channel by the time the deal would go down. Even though the WWF SmackDown contract with UPN expires in September, UPN has the option to renew the show for at least another season, so unless UPN would be willing to give up the WWF, which given the ratings and how WWF basically saved the network, is next to impossible, no such deal along those lines is going to be made for nearly 2 years. Actually, this story almost came across like something out there designed to get the stock moving upward since it has been so stagnant, and worked in that regard for one day. Obviously, with the WWF at a strong point visibility-wise, this is the time to try and play everyone off against each other and make the best deal. February 27th, No Way Out pay-per-view has Triple H vs. Foley in a Hell in the Cell match where Foley puts up his career against the title, and Rock vs. Show. The January 23rd Royal Rumble did about a 1.58 buy rate, which would be around 600,000 buys, as opposed to about 95,000 buys for WCW sold out the previous week and around 80,000 for ECW the week before that. The number of buys and revenue, about $7.73 million to the WWF, would be the second biggest of any Rumble in history, trailing last year, which did about 700,000 buys. It was the fifth highest buy rate of the 12 Rumbles on pay-per-view. Buy rates in the early 90s by and large were far higher than now because pay-per-view was more of a novelty and there weren't 12 shows per promotion per year, with the record being the 1991 Rumble in Miami. This is considered a good sign because in the WWF's prospectus of late, they were estimating only 650,000 buys for WrestleMania due to Steve Austin not being in the main event, and this Rumble seems to indicate they'll easily top that figure. Raw on February 7th drew a sellout 12,893, paying $367,619 to Reunion Arena in Dallas for a tremendous show. They opened with a more than 20-minute segment with the Radicals, they're still called that, and Cactus out. Triple H and Stephanie came out as well. Eventually they all turned on Foley since Triple H had secretly signed them to a contract. This sure seemed to smack of using the Douglas deal to create an angle with Foley in the Douglas position, and their response being it's just business, and anyone else in the situation would have made the same business decision. During the segment they made the Jack vs. Triple H Hell in the Cell match. Outlaws kept the tag titles, beating Edge and Christian in 6-11 when the damn Dudleys came out and harassed Jim Ross, and Bubba snapped Christian's neck on the ropes before Dog pinned him with a pump handle slam. This was a very entertaining match. Angle NC Henry in 2:05. Angle laid out Henry and Mae Young made the save. The match just ended and Angle suplexed Young, who did a stretcher job, and they threatened she would lose the baby. Backstage they showed Young on a stretcher and she took her top off with her back to the camera, and one of the EMTs had this sick look on his face. Hollies beat Acolytes in a hardcore match in 2:37. They ended up tearing down a concession stand. Both Acolytes drank beer during the match, Farouk right from the tap like a dog at a water faucet. Viscera did a run-in, and tripped on the wet floor, making him the new shock master. He then got up and hit Bradshaw with the 2x4 and crash-pinned him. What a messed up finish. Jericho beat Viscera via DQ in 3:01 to keep the IC title. Viscera's clumsiness was contagious in this match as Jericho's balance seemed off, slipping on the ropes once and whiplashing himself coming off the ropes another time. Real bad match. Chyna wasn't there as she was filming an episode of Third Rock. She could play the alien from another planet who didn't transform into a human body. Hollies attacked Jericho for the DQ and Acolytes made the save. Farouk nearly killed himself on the ropes as well. It must have been in the water or one screwed up ring. Jacqueline kept the women's title pinning Luna in 1:14 with a German suplex. Gangrel gave Jacqueline the Impaler DDT after the match. They did a video of Taz on the streets of Brooklyn. Well done. Rock did an interview saying he'd team with Foley in the main event and plugged his Poontang Pie t-shirts. He basically intimated Kevin Kelly was really a virgin when Kevin tried to intimate he's a ladies' man. Dudley's beat Godfather and Brown when Bubba injured Godfather's knee and they gave Brown a 3D in 2:49. BB came out to check on Godfather but Bubba attacked her and they teased power bombing her through a table but Edge, Christian and the Hardys all came out to save her. Main was the best match on Raw in a long time with Triple H and X-Pac and Radicals over Too Cool and Rikishi and Cactus and Rockin' 10-14. A genuine 4.25 stars match with the best heat on any Raw match in more than a year. Rikishi went up for Benoit's German suplex. It was just one of those nights where everything clicked perfectly. Finish saw Guerrero from the outside trip Grandmaster, and Triple H gave him a pedigree and Benoit pinned him after a diving headbutt. Outlaws came out with a pipe and laid out all the faces. Kane then came out with Paul Bearer, down 12 inches in the waist, but he's still far from svelte. Back as his manager and he cleaned house. The pop for Bearer was ridiculously loud even before Kane even came out. SmackDown on February 1st was the best edition of SmackDown to date. The show started with Cactus Jack calling out Benoit, Malenko, Saturn, and Guerrero. Jack really tried to present them as a big deal but the truth is the fans' reaction to all but Benoit was a big disappointment. Jack ripped on Atlanta a lot, saying that when you wrestle in Atlanta you check your pride at the door and wrestle only for a fat paycheck. He said that no matter how many good matches these guys had, they just weren't quite old enough for WCW. WCW badly needs to change its entire perception by giving mega pushes to younger guys. Whether ready or not, just remember Triple H was shoved down everyone's throat long before he was close to ready but it's paying off now with a well-rounded headliner. They also need to instill storyline coolness to the company but this is a broken record. Triple H and Stephanie came out and called the WCW guys average wrestlers. In a big surprise, they did subtly acknowledge Benoit's WCW title reign and for people who knew, they sort of set the table for the idea of the Benoit vs Triple H match as being champ versus champ, but really didn't play it up to anywhere near the degree they could have. Of course, with only 2 hours of hype, even doing so would be like a Russo angle as there wasn't enough time to get that concept over to where it would be effective and correctly done. It's one of those angles that only get handed to you once a decade and they've already blown it by blowing it off before even hyping it. Patterson and Briscoe had all the women draw straws to see who would get a title shot at Wippleman. Jacqueline drew the short straw but Moolah ended up molesting Patterson. Jericho, who came out with Chyna and praised her on the mic, kept the IC title beating Gangrel in 2:41 with the walls. Chyna stopped Luna from interfering. X-Pac beat Malenko in 4:08 in a damn good match with a low blow and X-Factor. Show showed slow-mo clips from the Rumble showing that Rock's feet hit the floor first, which set up Rock vs. Show as the February 27th No Way Out pay-per-view main event. Jacqueline beat Wippleman to win the women's title in 17 and then pulled his pants off. I wonder whose fantasy they were playing to having Harvey ran around in those briefs? Angle won a three-way over Taz and Rock. Three-ways usually stink, see Vampiro vs. Wall vs. Kidman, but these three worked together real well. Michael Cole said Angle has only one loss in WWF. I guess the match with Taz is now an illusion because the one loss was to Rock. Rock used the rock bottom on both when Show pulled him out of the ring and Angle got his arm on Taz for the pin in 5:05. Show choke slammed Rock on the floor. Although Rock did eventually leave both guys laying with his move, he did sell good for both of them and they for him. Outlaws beat Saturn and Guerrero. It was good when Dog was in and then got pretty bad when Gunn was in. Guerrero did the frog splash on Gunn, blew out his elbow and basically told Road Dogg to pin him after Saturn and Gunn went out of the ring in 4:28. There are a lot of things about this match that were really weird after seeing the TV version. The injury is obviously legit, a dislocated elbow and stretched ligaments in his right elbow, and he's expected out of action in about 6 weeks. Cactus Jack was originally expected to remain aligned with the group and maybe step into the ring with them more often in the early going. The plans all along were for Foley to work about 5 house shows per week as well as TV and pay-per-views through his plan stepping out of the ring around WrestleMania time. They showed close-ups and replays of the injury to death, which they traditionally never do for accident as opposed to angles. So this is turning into an angle. Also, they kept talking about Guerrero being at the hospital with a dislocated elbow like they do for a storyline. For non-storyline injuries they may mention it once, or usually not at all. Remember how they totally downplayed draws on television. Also, these 4 guys are all pros, and even if he was in great pain and they had to go to an emergency finish, why would Guerrero get pinned? When Guerrero got hurt, he called for the pin on himself, and we're told that everyone panicked. It's still strange. Austin may have been paralyzed, but he still pinned Owen Hart somehow. Even on an indie show, Bill Owens, with poor Gary Albright literally dying right in front of him, managed to get himself pinned in front of 100 people. If it was 4 inexperienced guys, the story that Saturn and Guerrero were supposed to win but because of the accident they lost would be one thing. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting they weren't originally going to win that match, as I'm sure they were supposed to. The fact they didn't change the finish of the main event and made it 3 straight seems to be really strange and not exactly the greatest way to get newcomers over. Either way, Benoit's first loss should have taken months and should have been with a build-up giving him sort of uncrowned world champion credibility first within the WWF before he lost a pay-per-view match to the current WWF champion. Something that should have probably been saved until May or June, although the audible they seemingly called made for tremendous TV as well on Monday. Head Cheese, Snow and Blackman, with Blackman coming to the ring with a cheesehead a la Green Bay Packers fans, beat Holly when Snow pinned Bob in 3:03. Bob beat up Crash after. Rikishi beat Sho via DQ in 1:57. Rikishi was the first guy to kick out of the choke slam, which didn't get nearly as big a pop as you'd think. Sho then hit him with a chair for the DQ, and then choke slammed both members of Too Cool who tried to help. Rock finally made the save, giving Sho the rock bottom. Triple H beat Benoit in what they were trying to get over as our champ against their champ, which guaranteed the finish, in 9:03. This was one awesome match. Easily the best match in SmackDown history. Triple H did tap for the crossface while the ref was down, but Triple H came back to win. Although Benoit did look much shorter in the ring than Triple H, he did not wrestle shorter, and they didn't do the exaggerated size gimmick in the storyline, so they didn't portray Benoit as short and he didn't come off with that perception. That was only one of the reasons it was a hell of a match. WCW has no idea how much they blew it big time, and I don't mean by letting Benoit go, but by how they handled him for the 4 years he was there. From what we're told, the feeling was not to change the originally planned finish and give Benoit a win because they are going to play up the tap out as an illusory win, and because they felt with Triple H planned for the main event at WrestleMania, they didn't want him losing before then. Of course, that doesn't explain the deal with Rikishi a few weeks ago, and they still could have audibilized to a crossface with the ref in there and a run-in DQ finish, so at least the newcomers wouldn't have been swept. It should also be noted that in just one night, they had X-Pac get out of the cloverleaf with a rope break, nog kick out of the frog splash, and Triple H not only survived the crossface twice but also kick out of the diving headbutt. Benoit, Guerrero, Malenko and Saturn all signed 3-year contracts. Benoit was on the Law on February 5th and said the reason they didn't push the title versus title angle is because the WCW title didn't mean anything and had no credibility to start with. He said because of the way they destroyed the belt that it meant nothing for him to win it, and said he was disappointed because he never got to feud with Hart or Flair as promised to him many times in WCW, and said that he only wrestled 2 world champions during his tenure in WCW, mentioning those 2 by name, and said he wrestled others who had worn the belt but he didn't consider them world champions. Some guys got knocked big time there. He also said in his mind when he left the building on January 17th, he was gone and it didn't matter what Douglas, Saturn, Guerrero or Saturn did. He said that they were in a car together after leaving the building, and Douglas said they should wait a week because Russo asked them to, but Benoit said the way it was all handled when they kicked them out of the building that he knew, no matter what the decision of anyone else would be, that he would never wrestle for the company again even if it meant having to sit out. ABC's 2020 piece on Mick Foley ran on February 3rd, mainly featuring comments from Foley, his wife Colette and Barry Blaustein, producer of Beyond the Mat. I guess the piece examined the issue of Foley destroying his body and the effects all the brutality is beginning to take on his brain, as well as it could be in a 10-minute piece. They presented the question about Foley, as whether it was worth it. and him saying it absolutely was because he lived his dream. Most people seemed to think it was a good piece. I have a feeling those in WWF felt differently by the fact they never mentioned the piece on TV, and it did touch on the side of the Foley issue that ruins the fun of the fans, but my feeling is it was too short to really get into the questions the piece left you asking about wrestling, what fans want and expect from wrestlers today, and the future of the wrestlers who copy Foley. The people who won't headline PPVs and make high six-figure incomes but will suffer the same physical and potential long-term mental deterioration from doing similar things and will be part of this new popularized style. Apparently, in doing the research on this piece, Jim Byrne of the WWF ripped on the movie Beyond the Mat to the ABC producers and claimed the footage of Foley's children crying at ringside during the Royal Rumble match was staged. Foley himself blasted Byrne for saying that to ABC, and Byrne did call back the producers to apologize. McMahon was on with Jim Rome on Rome's Last Word talk show on Fox Sports Net on February 3. It was an interesting give and take. Rome, who doesn't like or watch wrestling, had been given all the regular questions to ask. McMahon seemed to want the interview more on the XFL than WWF, but Rome kept it WWF-oriented. The problem is that while Rome asked the usual questions, with his unfamiliarity with the subject, he couldn't ask good follow-ups. McMahon handled himself well on the show, and Rome was not at all negative to him. However, once McMahon's interview was over, in Rome's closing comments he ripped into McMahon and wrestling savagely, calling it garbage and saying that McMahon has done some serious damage to society in producing a product with racism, sexism, etc. with so many young children watching, and concluded saying he didn't like wrestling, didn't watch wrestling, and called the product garbage, while praising McMahon as a great salesman and marketer. While Rome's comments are not that different from the opinion of many, he should have made those comments when McMahon was there, rather than saving his strong comments for after he had left, and he couldn't defend his product. When asked about drugs and drug testing, McMahon said he didn't perceive there to be a drug problem, and then said that Disney doesn't drug test its actors and that they don't drug test people who work with Rome on his show. Rome came back noting that nobody had dropped dead on his show, and that by looking at him, Rome, it was obvious he wasn't on anything, in reference to steroids and GH. Rome brought up that a lot of wrestlers had died, and McMahon said one died as a result of an accident, Owen Hart, and another was a heart attack allegedly from natural causes on an indie show, in obvious reference to Gary Albright. Rome's lack of knowledge showed here, because that ignores deaths like Bobby Duncombe Jr., Rick Rude, Brian Pillman, Art Barr, Eddie Gilbert, Louis Piccoli, etc., which drugs contributed to. He talked about Hart and confronted him about going on with the show. McMahon said that people looking at it in hindsight could have gone either way with it, and defended it by saying if it were up to Owen, the show would have gone on. Rome came back saying that Owen Hart's family doesn't feel that way. McMahon didn't expect the comeback and just said they're entitled to their opinion, and then Rome brought out that his brother called it cold-blooded, to which McMahon responded saying that his brother has a vendetta against him, and gave basically a "don't get me started" on his brother response. McMahon brought up the stunt had been tested earlier and the same people who handled it had done it for Ted Turner's wrestling on numerous occasions, and said that to this day nobody is exactly sure what happened. On WWF versus WCW comparisons, he said that his company was more youth-oriented, although later in the show he did complain about the nature of which both Hogan and Savage left his company for WCW. Savage actually did, Hogan never left WWF for WCW. McMahon left Rome stunned at one point when Rome asked him if he thought it was okay for an 11-year-old to watch the WWF, and McMahon said he thought it absolutely was. It should be noted that McMahon in the past has always stated that it was okay for kids of any age to watch the weekend shows, but that Raw in specific shouldn't be viewed by kids. So it wasn't him necessarily pulling a reverse, but Rome, not knowing the particulars of what McMahon had said in the past as it regards Raw versus the entire product, was momentarily shocked by the answer. Rome said if he had kids he'd never let an 11-year-old watch the product, and McMahon basically said that was up to him to decide. Jim Ross met with Shawn Michaels over Super Bowl weekend when he was in San Antonio doing the interview with Austin. Michaels expressed an interest in returning to television, but nothing was decided, but was also trying to get some of his wrestlers' looks. As far as rumors going everywhere of Michaels wrestling at WrestleMania, or even returning as an in-ring performer, at the meeting Michaels said that his back problems had worsened and neither side even brought up the possibility of him wrestling. Undertaker underwent surgery on January 31st in Nashville for his torn pec suffered while weightlifting. He's expected out 3 to 4 months. The plan is for him to return as a face on top, but it wouldn't surprise me to see him return fresh at that point and make a run at Rock. There's at least talk of Scott Vick and Joe Hicklin debuting as a tag team managed by Karen Marr, a stunt woman who they found at the Southern California casting call and feel has good potential. Steve Bradley is being sent to Puerto Rico before starting here. Sylvester Turkey, who wrestled for UFO in Japan, one match at the UFO Big Van Vader, will be starting in Louisville. British Bulldog missed TV this past week also due to a back injury, and Stevie Richards is still being kept out of the ring because his foot isn't 100%. Taka Michinoku looks to be out about 3 more weeks after a dislocated shoulder, taking that bump in the Royal Rumble that was replayed about 100 times. Test has a bulging disc in his back and looks to be out another week or 2. Expect fitness model Trish Stratus to start in some television role within a few months. All talks with Dreamstage Entertainment have broken off. The two sides had differing ideas on how to handle WWF in Japan. Basically, DSE wanted to get a Japanese TV tapings and run a few big shows, while WWF didn't want a commitment in Japan, anything like that, and was only interested in doing one Tokyo Dome show a year. WWF Volume 4 was number 102 on the charts this week with 13,841 units sold. According to a New York Daily News article on the success of the Rock book, they said the next of the 8 books Regan Publishing will be releasing will be of China. The Sports Rec video chart saw WWF in the top 7 spots and 14 of the top 20. WCW's only entrant was Nitro Girls at number 19. Top 7 in order were Rock, Austin vs. McMahon, Best of Raw, Austin, Triple H and China, and Another with Austin. The Boston Globe on February 20th had a lengthy article in the Child Care Center of how parents should deal with their kids who like WWF, noting its popularity among 9 to 12-year-old boys. The article had a major factual mistake, saying SmackDown was the second most watched program on network TV this season. It's hovered between number 70 and number 95 in the ratings. It said that professionals who study the influence of pop culture on children say boys would be better off if they never watched WWF, but said it's too late for that. It said being a wrestling fan wouldn't make a child who isn't going to hit another go out and hit another, but it does make all children watching to a degree less sensitive to real-life violence and lose their sense about how much it hurts when people punch other people. The article said the message is an even bigger issue for boys under 7, according to childhood educator and author Nancy Carlson Page. She noted that preschoolers are genuinely surprised if they shove down a classmate and they cry. She claims when young kids see older siblings and parents really into the WWF, they learn the message that violence is not only okay, but entertaining, and they are socialized to accept violence long before they are able to understand its meaning. She urged parents to keep children under 7 away from watching WWF TV, to the point of saying that if parents have let them watch, they should tell the children they made a mistake and explain how bad it is to watch. They recommended professional consultation, really, they did, for kids around the age of 5th grade who are obsessed with WWF. For who kids watch the TV regularly but aren't obsessed with it, parents should talk to kids about it, not knock it, but recommended trying to reduce viewing of the show and watch the show with them. They particularly knocked the idea of WWF watching as a family activity, saying that while people may consider this togetherness, it becomes a parent's stamp of approval on the product as entertainment, and recommends parents who like WWF programming to tape it and watch it after the kids are put to bed. February 1st SmackDown tapings in Detroit sold out Joe Louis Arena to the tune of 14,996, paying $376,633. House show on February 5th in Mobile, Alabama drew a sellout 10,045, paying $243,228, and February 6th in New Orleans drew 14,247, paying $360,088. The mobile sellout was with neither Triple H nor Rock on the show, as they went with Kane and Cactus over Outlaws via DQ as the main event, with Rikishi over Bossman second from the top. In New Orleans, they did 6 mans on top, with the faces going over clean, adding Rock and Triple H to the mix. Merchandise for the past week's house shows was $420,686, or $8.06 per head. The readers' pages. XFL. Although I want to make the obvious jokes, I'll instead ask a question. Is the XFL a business venture or a Vince McMahon ego trip? After all, Ted Turner wanted to start a football league and that didn't work out. Vince McMahon supposedly wanted to buy an NFL team and was interested in purchasing the Canadian Football League. Is Vince's ego getting the best of him? The WWF is a public company now. You can't go around telling investment bankers to kiss your ass. I believe you can't make moves based on ego when you've got stockholders bankrolling a big piece of your company. Jamie Gerard. We all know this league will never even start up, so why give Vince McMahon more hype? Charles Spratt. What if it works? He isn't trying to use NFL players. That's where the USFL went wrong. When this makes off, Vince McMahon will be able to sell all of the team for a handsome price. Just remember what he did in 1983? Everyone thought he was crazy to go national. Ryan Ashby. San Francisco, California. I think the Wall Street analysts are right on the money about the XFL. Vince knows his wrestling. He doesn't know anything outside of wrestling. His boxing attempts failed. His bodybuilding efforts failed. Did he try to bankroll a movie? Part of the success of wrestling is the focus on the individual. Football is a team sport with faces covered by masks. The characters that have made the WWF a success are significantly muted in football. Unless he books the games, has quarterbacks cut promos in the huddle, and has cheerleaders mud wrestling at halftime and only counts touchdowns when the running back goes through a table, I expect little success. Its ultimate success may simply be to promote the wrestling side of his business and name teams the Miami Rocks, the New York Attitude, and the Dallas Rattlesnakes. Brad Bellotti. Springfield, Missouri. Vince McMahon is good at one thing: promoting the WWF. He has no idea what he's getting into. A legitimate sports league is very hard to control, manage, and run. Ask Donald Trump. The NFL-owned and endorsed World League draws shit ratings. This is a failure waiting to happen. Darren Chan. San Francisco, California. 10 things to look forward to from the XFL. 10. We get to hear Jim Ross give football players wrestling backgrounds. 9. Suspended players are allowed to still play under hoods. 8. Foreign kickers are announced as being from parts unknown. 7. The first 2 coaches hired will be Buzz Stern and John Tolos. 6. Referee bumps. 5. Instant replay challenges on the Titantron. 4. XFL champions receive the Vince McMahon Trophy. 3. Mae Young is a cheerleader. 2. Hardcore games with no helmets. 1. The first football game in history with a dusty finish. Russell Kress. Union, New Jersey. I haven't heard anyone yet compare the XFL proposal to its true counterpart, the World League of American Football. The Wolf was a spring minor league for the NFL in cities like Raleigh, Orlando, Birmingham, etc. It failed miserably in the US, despite having a network contract with ABC. It is now doing okay exclusively overseas as NFL Europe. I really see very little difference in the Wolf concept and what McMahon is proposing, and I would have to think he is keenly aware of the Wolf's failure. I don't know why he would be doing this, but remember that Ted Turner made a similar announcement 1 year ago, and a few months later decided it was unfeasible. Tim Wyatt. Whether it's the clash of titans in the ring or the drama that unfolds outside it, we're here to break it down, match by match, feud by feud. Remember, in the world of wrestling, every day is a battle, and every victory is a story waiting to be told. Until next time, keep the passion alive, and never stop wrestling with the possibilities. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,